Here's where I left off. We have our electrons eventually moving over to photosystem 1. Water is continuously supplying electrons to photosystem 2, and oxygen is continually being released, and hydrogens are being constantly pulled into the thylakoid lumen. Oxygen doesn't get released as O. Remember, oxygen is diatomic. It needs to exist as O2. And so this O is just actually going to hang out until another O becomes available where it can join with that O to make O2, and we can watch that happening here. As these electrons move up, as they get energized from light, we need to then fill this space with 2 more electrons. So water is going to come in, fill that space with 2 more electrons, release an oxygen. There we have an O2. Plant breathes it out, and us humans will breathe that in. So electrons are going to make it over to this photosystem 1. What happens over in photosystem 1? Similar to what happened in photosystem 2. The electrons get energized by sunlight. So the electrons move to a higher level in the protein. They get energized, they start vibrating, move up to this higher energy level in the protein. They're continuously getting supplied by this process that's continually happening because of the photolysis of water. But what these electrons do is something different than what the other ones did. These electrons are going to be transferred to NADP positive. NADP positive is a compound that exists in the cell, and it's like a little transporter compound. I like to say it's like a little taxi. When we look at what's happening, we're just looking at the light reaction here. We haven't looked at the dark reaction. The dark reaction is going to make the actual glucose molecule that is the product of photosynthesis. So C6H12O6. The hydrogens in that C6H12O6, the H, come from these H's here, but they need to be brought over there. Well, NADP's job is to bring the hydrogens over to the dark reaction, which we'll talk about in the future. So you have these hydrogen molecules that need to be brought over there. Well, they've got the NADP taxi to bring them. Now, just like when water split, and when water split, it released electrons, well, now we want to join two things. If we want to join two things, we need to add electrons. So these electrons are actually going to cause NADP to fuse with hydrogen to make a compound called NADPH. And that NADPH will drive its way over to the dark reaction where the H's can be dropped off to help make glucose. So there we go. We've got NADPH being made. And it's just going to continually happen because we continually have a feed of electrons coming in from that original splitting of water way back in photosystem 2. There's your NADH being produced again. So that is your part of your light-dependent reaction. There's something we haven't talked about yet. We haven't talked about ATP. So in ATP, the ATP production that happens in this, ATP is going to need to drive the dark reaction. We're going to need ATP so that the dark reaction or the making of sugars is going to occur. Where does that ATP come from? Well, if we look back at this thylakoid membrane, I'll just go back even just a touch further. Here we have what we just talked about, and you can listen to it over and over again if you'd like to try to make sure you understand it. But there's also a little complex down here called the ATP synthase complex. Now, the hydrogens were getting pumped from the outside of the grana to the inside. When you get too many hydrogens on the inside, though, just like any cell, it's like, wait a minute, there's too many in here. I need to balance myself, right? It's not working because I have too many positive charges on the inside. I need to pump some of them out. And the way they get pumped out is through this complex right here called the ATP synthase complex. And this process is called chemiosmosis because it's kind of osmosis-like and it's chemical. And so you have these whole bunch of positive charges on the inside that now need to be pumped out. So if we watch what happens, I'm going to have to just go a little bit fast here on this one. Your buildup of hydrogens, because remember the electrons brought them in, now they need to be pumped out. So they get pumped out through this complex. And when they get pumped out, ADP will join with phosphate molecules to create ATP, and you can see that happening as I talk through this. ADP, I treat that as also like a taxi. ADP is going to be like a taxi of energy from one side of the cell to the other, and it's taking energy that is created from this process and taking it to the dark reaction, and we need that energy in the dark reaction to drive the production of C6H12O6 because that's what we're trying to do in photosynthesis. So here you can see as the hydrogens get pumped out, ATP gets produced. That ATP is also going to be used in the dark reaction to help make C6H12O6. So we can continue watching that. So at the end, it shows we get ATP that go to the dark